Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. I'm Nick Pellavito. I'll be your moderator for today's show. And today's show, we have a very special topic involving world leaders and the economy. So with that, we're going to go ahead and bring our panelists in before we start looking at the world leaders. And first of all, from Canada, a former dentist who now is author of the famous book, Monday Morning Millionaire, from Canada, Dr. Milan Sobranic. Hey, Dr. Milan, welcome to the show.
Thank you for inviting me. Delighted to be here.
Yeah, and we're going to be talking about world leaders, which means your leader is also up. Also, we're going to bring in from the Raleigh-Durham area the president of Pod TV, who actually founded this network years ago, Kim Calhoun. Kim, welcome. I don't know what city you're beaming in from now, but you don't know either. Okay, and then, of course, David L. Walker is going to join us to discuss world leaders. And this is going to be a very interesting topic because should we start, David, from the top or the bottom?
That's an opinion, right? So,
well, top down. I have top down world leaders and bottom up.
Well, whatever you want. I'm at your lead.
Okay. Well, I don't want to put them at the very bottom, but since Milan is in Canada, we're going to start with Trudeau. Okay. What are your thoughts about Justin Trudeau of Canada? Maybe we should bring in Milan first on this one because he is a Canadian and maybe has some thoughts about Justin Trudeau. So,
thank you. Well, as far as Trudeau is concerned, there are no credible alternatives to him. And so world leaders, doesn't matter what they do, whatever the economic situation is, it will benefit some and it will not benefit others. There are very few certainties in economics, one of which is there is no economic environment which benefits all. So it doesn't matter what the leaders do, somebody will get hurt and somebody will benefit. So we just have to make sure that more people benefit than lose. So they're dealing with inflation. That's something that they have to face. And people benefit from inflation if they're borrowers. Borrowers benefit from inflation because you lend them $1,000. A few years later, they give you back your $1,000, except it doesn't buy what you gave them. It buys less. And who is the biggest borrower on the planet would be governments, led by the United States, of course. Canada is a very small country, population 40 million just recently. So it can't have a lot of impact except to serve as a model. And Canada does that very well. Under the leadership of one of our former prime ministers, the Human Development Index, which measures things like life expectancy and the number of physicians per 1,000 and safety and all those things, a large list of what's measured. Canada was number one 5 years in a row. Where can you go from being number one 5 years in a row? You can only go down. But, the top 10 or 15 countries are all doing well. And so Trudeau, there's no visible alternative to Trudeau. And so his father was prime minister of our country a few years ago, and he's a liberal leader. And I come from Yugoslavia, former Yugoslavia, which is really economically struggling and a backward country. And the Liberals let me into Canada, so I've been voting Liberal ever since. So whether it's Trudeau who is leading or anybody else, as an expression of gratitude for allowing me to live in this wonderful country.
Okay.
So that's my take on Trudeau.
David Walker, any response to our friend from Canada about Justin Trudeau as a world leader?
Well, first, I would respectfully suggest there's a difference between being the leader of a nation and being a world leader. I respect what Milan said with Trudeau, and his view that there's no real viable alternative in Canada. And I don't really think it's appropriate for me to comment on whether he's appropriate or not for Canada. But I would say I don't think he's a world leader. Is he a leader that is part of the G20? Is he a leader that? Yeah, I mean, yes, right. But there's a difference between being a member and being a leader. Okay.
That's true.
It's just like in Congress. Okay. Not all members are equal. And some make a difference, and some have an outsized impact, and some don't. So we can go one by one, but I would on all of mine, I'm going to say, I'm not going to reflect on whether or not they're an appropriate leader for their country, because that's not my business. But I will comment on whether or not I think they're a world leader or not. And, Canada is 1/10 the size of the United States. It is an important ally. It is an important country. But I don't think that I would put Justin Trudeau on the world leader stage, meaning that people are looking for what he does, being influenced by that. Yes, please.
And let me ask you this. Can a leader of a small country be a world leader? Is that possible? Has it happened before?
Yes, I think it is possible. And we can think out loud, but I mean, sometimes you have people that become head of the UN, that are from smaller countries, all right, and they can be world leaders. Yeah, you can have somebody like you've had Golda Meir from Israel. Okay, yes. Clearly was a world leader, and that's not a very big country. So, you're more likely to be deemed to be a world leader if you're from a major country. All right, because merely the fact that you're a leader of a major country gives you status. You may or may not be a very good leader, but it gives you status. And I'll give you an example. I mean, I was when I was Comptroller General of the United States, which is Auditor General basically and Chief Accountability Officer. I was on the board of the International Organization for Auditor Generals, and we had a board of directors, and we had people that were responsible for different things. And merely the fact that I was the Comptroller General of the United States meant that I was automatically going to be on the board, and but that doesn't mean that you necessarily would have taken advantage of that, right? And then we had people from smaller countries who were on the board who were very active and clearly made a difference. But they had an opportunity because they were at the table. And they took advantage of being at the table. So,
okay, we're going to move further south, and we're going to pick on a country called Australia, because we have a resident person from Australia here. We're going to pick on this person, Anthony Albanese, who's the Prime Minister of Australia, at least to my knowledge. I don't know what happened to Morrison, but Shaquille O'Neal. Shaquille Latimer is actually a resident, or actually is from Australia, lives in Australia sometimes. What are your thoughts about Anthony as a world leader?
I don't even think he's a very good leader of Australia, let alone the world. But maybe him and Justin Trudeau could.
This is being broadcast all over the world to 200.
Oh, good. Yeah, well, maybe him and Justin Trudeau can link up and compare notes. I will say I'm not a resident of Australia. I will say that I think Milan's comments were right, that really doesn't matter what decision the politicians make, there's going to be a group or a part of society that will benefit and a part that won't. But I think the idea of reaching in and trying to redistribute wealth as being a solution to inequities is a very poor way of doing it. They should be doing it by, incentivizing businesses. They should be doing it by putting more money into education, healthcare, and things like that. These are my comments, by the way, not the comments of the Pacific Rim Chamber of Commerce. But yeah, I mean, look, Anthony Albanese, he won the election with 7 out of 10 Australians not voting for him. So Australia basically turned into New Zealand in the last federal election. At the moment, he probably has more support than, he's certainly polling much better than the conservative twerp that's in there at the moment. I don't know why the Liberal Party, which is our Conservative Party, decided to put one of the most unpopular and unelectable and unlikable people in as its leader, but they did. So for as long as they do that, you're going to see the Labor Party come in with all of its fantastical ideas.
Okay, we'll get David Walker's comment. What are your thoughts on Anthony Albanese from
Albanese?
Albanese. Yeah. Well, first, I defer to Shaquille with regard to whether or not he's an effective leader in Australia. Secondly, I would respectfully suggest that 98% of Americans never heard of him. And I would respectfully suggest that probably 98% of people in most other countries never heard of him either. Okay. And so I would not view him as being a world leader. Sounds like, according to Shaquille, he may not even be a leader in Australia.
Well,
I will just make the comment both about Justin Trudeau and him, that I think in the Commonwealth, the leaders of Canada, Australia, and the UK obviously have a lot more influence over sort of former British countries. So that'd be more well known here. But again, we see some decisions that you sort of are shocked at. So his predecessor in the Conservative Party was Scott Morrison. They entered the AUKUS deal, the Australia, UK, and US deal in relation to the nuclear submarines. I think that was a good thing for our country. I'm not sure if I would have made that deal if I was the US president, but certainly I'm not going to complain sitting here in Australia. But I think that a lot of the things that is happening in centre-left politics in the Commonwealth, in Commonwealth countries, has a lot to do with, say, climate change and social issues. And I think that that's a great distraction away from the economic issues. And I think that some of the plans being proposed have absolutely no costings or practicality in their application. And I think that's quite disappointing to see.
Okay, we're going to move further under to a country that has over 100 million people. Dr. Sharif, what are your thoughts about the world leader, Sheikh Hasina? Is he a world leader? Dr. Sharif.
Okay.
I'll put you on the spot.
Thank you, everyone. Actually, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to give thanks to give me the opportunities. Yes, definitely, I have full respect for our Honorable Prime Minister, Sheikh Hasina, because after 7-8 years' time, I come back to my countries and I'm observing some improvement, how she developed like our grassroots level people, our different infrastructures and everything. This is very interesting. On the other hand, there are some political issues as well, because country like Bangladesh, this is very small. And yes, USA, and because of US and Russia war, Russia and Ukraine war, USA try to develop new strategy for the global economy and the global leaders. Country like Bangladesh, definitely we are struggling right now for this kind of powerhouse. This is another issue, but most important thing is that if you ask me about the leadership, let's say Mahatma Gandhi, according to my views, he was a great leader for humanity developments. Beside that, from my views, who can contribute, who can invest his time, energy, money, effort, and everything for human development, for human progressions, that is important for the global leadership. Right now, I believe that, yes, we have many leaders. Definitely, we have G20, we have many big countries, we have many big leaders. But we need people, we need political leaders who can unite whole world right now, because we have a lot of divisions. We have, yes, we improve a lot in modern science, engineering, and technology. But what is the progress of the emerging economy? What is the progress of the 54% community who lives in developing nations? I believe that still the global leader, they are not in right track to give the proper direction. Because if you see the people I know from Bangladesh, from India, we have massive like price increase. We have money inflations. We have energy problem. We have food and water security related problems. A lot of challenges actually happening right now. But this is very pathetic. We are observing global leaders. They are more focused on in political control. They more focus on war. They more focus on divide and rule. But this is high time. We are global people. We have to work together. We have to help each other, and we have to understand the global people and the global understanding, because of technological improvement, people are discussing together like Pod TV. People are engaging together like Pod TV. People are sharing their views and knowledge. So I'm requesting the global leader, definitely Professor Nick Palvedan, Madam Kimberly, Professor David Walker, and all of the senior people, those who joined today's sessions. This is very, very crucial moment. As a human, everybody can be leaders. All of the people, those who join today's session, they can be a good leaders. If you can invest your time, your money, your experience for the grassroots level people. We need good leaders. We need good people like you. Thank you.
Okay, we'll get David Walker. What's your opinion on Sheikh Hasina, who actually has more than Canada and Australia combined in terms of people down in Bangladesh? What's your thoughts?
Not nearly as much territory, but more people. All right.
Not much territory, nope, a lot of people.
I've heard that progress is being made in Bangladesh, and she's obviously the leader of Bangladesh, so she deserves some credit for that. It's difficult for somebody who is leader of a country who, while it has a large population, it doesn't have a large GDP, and it's got a number of challenges itself that it's got to deal with domestically. It's difficult for somebody in that situation to be deemed to be a world leader. They are a leader. They are a leader within the world, but I don't think that what's happening there is having a major impact throughout the world.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And now we're going to go up the food chain a little bit. Here, yes, Milan.
Can I ask a question?
Milan.
I'd like to ask a question about women leaders. When we were facing the COVID, the best performing countries dealing with COVID, ones that performed the best were Finland and New Zealand and Taiwan and a couple of others, all were led by women. Would the world be better off if we had more women leaders? Because when you take a look at a picture of global leaders gatherings anywhere, very few women there. Would we be better off, as we were when we were dealing with COVID, if we had more women involved?
That's a good question, considering our panel makeup.
I would say there are obviously differences between men and women, much beyond our physiques. Okay.
Of course, yeah.
Women, in my opinion, tend to not just live for today. They tend to focus more on the future, which means that they care more about how things are going to affect their kids and their grandkids. They care more about things like education. They care about some things that, like, for example, I would imagine that they didn't shut down all the schools, when COVID came, because of the serious adverse impact that would have on socialization and learning for kids that it would take years to be able to recover from. Okay. So I think, there have been some very effective female world leaders. We haven't had one in the United States yet. We've had some that were qualified but didn't make it. We had one who ran who didn't make it, largely because I think people voted more against her rather than for her. Just like when Trump ran, I think they voted more against Hillary Clinton, than for Trump. And when Biden ran, I think they voted more against Trump than for Biden. And we might get to that later. We'll see whether we have a rematch or not this next time. But I think, look at Angela Merkel. Okay, look at Golda Meir. Look at look at Finland. Look at say New Zealand, etc. Taiwan. Although Taiwan's not a country, that's a whole different subject.
Yeah, right.
They're not a country. We don't have a defense treaty, although some people don't understand that. So I think women make good leaders, and I think we ought to have more women leaders. But it's all should be case by case and on the merits, not based upon what your gender is or what your race is or what your ethnicity is. I mean, I'd like to get a more merit-based society, but I'd like to get more women as leaders because I do think they think and act differently.
Yeah. Recently, this is Steve Rao. A few years ago before COVID, I had the honor of introducing Kevin O'Leary, who's Mr. Wonderful on Shark Tank in Cary, North Carolina. And what he said was that he actually, if he had the choice of investing in a woman entrepreneur or a male entrepreneur, he always invests in women because they're better at managing tasks and they don't overpromise. And they're always a little bit more meeting their numbers from sales and things like that. All the women were so delighted that Mr. Wonderful, who actually is a really, really nice guy, he was the founder of, I think, the Learning Company, and he's on Shark Tank. But I found that to be interesting. So hopefully, the presidency of the United States eventually, the right women at the right time can run. That I think demonstrate, good leadership. And the best managers I've had, I'm no longer really working. I'm kind of semi-retired and in politics. I don't really have a manager, I'm just a partner in a firm. But the best managers I had were women managers. And I
think about working women who have kids at home.
And I'll give you an example real quickly. I'll just throw this inside. I had a woman boss who was the head of sales, and I was in business development, and I was there for 14 years. But she was my direct report for 7 years or 6 years. And what I really liked about her was that whenever I went into the boardroom to present, she would never throw me out of the bus and say, well, you better do good or else. She would bring me in her office and say, we need to come up with some slides that make you and I look good. And it really made me feel great. We were in it together. And it was hard because we had to put the numbers together. But I felt this nurturing kind of supportive thing where typically a male boss manager would just throw you to the wolves and say, hey, I can't touch it with a 10-foot pole. Good luck. And that's just my personal experience, right? So anyway.
Okay, yeah, and we're going through the world leaders. The next one we have is.
If I could just quickly pipe in here, I mean, it's all great for us to round those women, and I think that women have got great contributions to make. They're not all the same, and not every person who's a woman is going to make a good manager or a good leader. As for the connection between COVID outcomes and women leaders that Milan has made. Look, there are countries that were led by women that had very poor results as well. So I don't think that correlation is causation. I don't think you can just say it must be because a woman is a leader of those countries. It could have something to do with the sort of countries that elect women. It could have a lot to do with lots of things. And as to Dave Walker's comment about not shutting down the schools, well, I can certainly tell you in New Zealand, they had one case on the North Island, so they shut down both islands completely. They shut the borders to everybody in the world, including to Australians. And so myself, who had an elderly relative who was in the last few years of her life, I wasn't able to go and see her. The rest of my family were not able to go and see her. And they had one case. So, sometimes there is other factors that cause these results. I don't think we should just sit back and say, well, let's just put women in charge of everything in the world to be a better place. I think we need to have a healthy contribution from both genders and a healthy contribution, from a diverse group of people in the world. I think will make the world a better, stronger place.
Yeah, my comment about the schools was really the Scandinavian schools. Okay, I hear what you're saying. Not all men are the same. Not all women are the same. We need a combination.
Yeah.
But we are different. We are different physically. Yeah.
Very interesting to look at Sweden because Sweden really resisted shutting down. They resisted things like the vaccine mandates, things like that. Here in Australia, we have obviously, state by state system. The state, Sydney's in New South Wales, avoided the lockdowns for a really significant period of time. We have a female, at that time we had a female premier. It's like a governor for you guys. And the state south of us, which is where Melbourne is, Victoria, has a male premier. He had very, very harsh lockdowns, but yet the death rate of Victoria was substantially higher than what it was in New South Wales, which is a more populous state. So look, I do try to be careful of criticising any political leader for their conduct during COVID because I think everybody was just doing their best based on the information they had, and we're in unknown territory. But yeah, as I said, I think women have got a contribution to make, but I don't think we should put them on a pedestal.
Okay. We're going to go to the next world leader. And
I want to add some point. As you are discussing about women leaders like Bangladesh Sheikh Hasina, Honorable Prime Minister, she is women leaders. I have one specific view because my PhD on glass ceiling factor on women leadership. So this is one of my PhD. I finished 2 PhD. So my first thing is that Western world, especially, yes, you are discussing about New Zealand, you are discussing about Australia, Scandinavian country, Australia, many countries. Definitely, I respect these leaders, but leaders who is performing well based on how many people actually getting benefit from the woman leader. This is also you have to justify. Let's say Bangladesh Prime Minister, Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, she uplifted around 170 million to 80 million people. Our another woman leaders, Mamata Banerjee from India, she is as a chief minister, she is also uplifting around 100 million people. If you compare Austria, New Zealand prime ministers, how many people, what is the infrastructure, what is the economic condition? They are in better condition, they are in better shape. But the global leader, they have to justify, they have to recognize, as well as they have to give definitely give some good feedback on the women leadership, like in Bengal area, like most in East Bengal and the West Bengal, like Bangladesh and like Paschim Bongo. So in that particular area, I believe that the researchers, academicians, policymakers, you have to focus on the leadership. How many people? Because let's say Bangladesh prime ministers, she actually uplifting people with the minimum resources. She don't have enough resources like Europe. She don't have enough resources like USA or like New Zealand, but she is uplifting huge amount of communities. On the other hand, for the global politics and the global issues we are observing now, she is in pressures for political issues and many more things. So I believe that Western political leaders, Western policymakers, I'm sure you are in the show or you are observing the show, you have to be more open. You have to be more specific. You do not have to like, oh, this is from Bangladesh, so their leadership we cannot count. We only count the New Zealand leaderships. You have to count Bangladesh or Mamata Banerjee leadership very strongly. So we have to count them as a human. So this is the first things we have to identify and the first thing we have to do. And we have to respect all of the global leaders.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We're going to be moving up the food chain a little bit, and we're going to get, this is a toss-up since we don't have anybody from this particular country. Macron from France. Well, I'll just take it to David. What is your thought of him as a world leader? France always thinks they're world leaders, so I guess he's a world leader.
Well, when you look in history, I mean, France has been, a major leader over the centuries. It's not as influential as it used to be. It's clearly, part of the G7, part of the G20. It's part of NATO. It's part of the European Union. It's part of the Eurozone. They are an influential country. There are a number of countries in the third world that are French-speaking, that are former colonies of France. I wouldn't say it's tier one. It's not tier one with regard to world leadership, but I do think it has. I do think it has an impact beyond its borders. Beyond the borders of France. And of course, they've had some problems here lately because they're trying to increase their retirement age from 62, which is very low. And they had riots in the streets over it, 62 to 64, I think. But yeah, I think he is a leader within the European Union. I think he is above average leadership within NATO. In the G20 and the G7, and I think France has influence beyond its territorial borders. But I would put him at tier 2, not tier 1.
Tier 2, okay. Now we'll go to the United Kingdom, Rishi Sunak. David, what's your thoughts on him being a world leader?
Well, the United Kingdom used to be the global leader up until the early 1900s. It's no longer the global leader. UK exited, the European Union. It was never part of the Eurozone. It does have influence beyond its borders. He is a leader, but I would put him at tier 2.
Okay.
They're a strong ally of the United States, one of the strongest allies of the United States, despite the fact that we had a little disagreement to gain our independence.
Okay.
Well, if I might just weigh in.
Jump in, Shaquille. Jump in.
I'll say firstly, I think that any country which is a member of the Security Councils, those countries' leaders are definitely world leaders.
I agree.
I'll just say in relation to France, I think this is the problem. We've talked about this on the show before about raising the retirement age, and Dave, you've talked about that in the United States in relation to social security payments and things like that. This is the problem, though, that we've had, is that this has just been kicked down the road for such a long period of time that now you don't have any choice. And, I think that young people today have every right to be annoyed that they're not going to be able to get the same sorts of benefits. And probably it's going to be harder for them. It's going to cost them more to get an education. It's going to be harder for them to get a trade license if they're going to go into a trade. It's more expensive for them to buy a house. And now they're going to have to live, they're going to have to work longer as well. And I don't think that's particularly fair. I think that's why you see that reaction in France. In relation to the UK not being as powerful anymore, I believe it was Roosevelt, that the president of the United States during World War II, who said to the UK, "We'll give you 50 aircraft carriers, I think it was, but you've got to give us eight of your army bases around the world." That sound about right?
Yeah, I think it was destroyers.
Destroyers would have been.
We've never had 50 aircraft carriers at once.
Yeah, no, my mistake. So
Yeah,
50 destroyers. You give up 8 of your international military bases. And I think that a natural result of that, of course, was that, the UK was supplanted by the United States. But also, look, after Pearl Harbor, before Pearl Harbor, the US was kind of okay. It was sort of the sleeping giant that was kind of trying to be relatively neutral and stay out of this. And it was really after Pearl Harbor that sort of, poked the sleeping giant, and the United States came in guns blazing to save the world. But in relation to your independence, I will just say the United States didn't win it on their own. You guys went and made all these underhanded deals with France and all these other countries, and then you reneged on those deals, shall we say?
Which deals are you talking about? I'm not sure.
Well, the United States in the Civil War, the War of Independence, you didn't just defeat the United Kingdom on your own.
The French fleet was particularly influential in Yorktown because it blocked the ability of the British fleet to get in so that they could evacuate their army, and therefore they were surrounded, and therefore they had to surrender.
That's right. There was a number of other European interests that helped the United States, but of course, the United States, after getting its independence, then decided to mosey up to the United Kingdom and turn its back on those European allies, and it helped them to get their independence. It's something I thought I might throw in there for amusement.
Well, I'll just leave one thing. I think we helped them out in World War I and World War II, but
a couple hundred years later.
Better late than never.
The next world leader we have on our list is a guy named Vladimir Putin. And with that, we do not have a representative from Russia, but we do have somebody who's the host of the show. Yes, Ukraine, Russia, China. So we'll ask Sasha Starr, what are your thoughts on Vladimir Putin being a world leader?
World leader Vladimir Putin. A criminal, and he became criminal not just recently because of the war in Ukraine. He was a criminal in his much younger days when he was operated in St. Petersburg, and all his closest friends were Russian mafia figures and so on. And then when he became president, slowly all his former friends, they started dying mysterious deaths. Somebody just was pronounced dead. Somebody got very sick, some stomach flu or something similar to that. I think that it was a Novichok, dead. Many people died outside of Russia. World leader. Well, if people like this can be considered world leaders, then anybody can be a world leader. Donald Trump can be a world leader. Even Biden can be a world leader. And I think this is considering the former world leaders such as Roosevelt, Churchill, Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, I think it's became so devaluated, and I wouldn't call anybody in this world a world leaders. They're not leaders. They're puppets. They are completely.
Sasha, isn't part of the problem, and I want to hear David's thoughts about Putin as a world leader, but isn't part of the problem that when you think of world leaders, you are thinking about people that can have influences on the various parts of the world in general? There are a multitude of continents that are out there, at least those 5 principal continents, and I would argue to some degree that whether it is his influence with the grain market and the influence on disrupting some parts of the world, be that Asia or Africa, that Russia does play a role in that and everything. We don't approve of it and don't necessarily like what they do, but they definitely manipulate a lot of the world economies and the world leadership. And isn't that part of the definition of what a world leader is? Because there was this whole concept way back when of imperialism and neo-imperialism and all along those lines, and that is what they were doing, was going over the spoils of the smaller countries. And I would argue that Russia, and to some degree China, that is going on today as well. So wouldn't that make you a world leader?
A good point.
I would say that, as was mentioned previously, that if you're head of a country that is a permanent member of the UN Security Council, by definition, you have an ability to be a world leader merely because of that position. Okay. But I would say that Putin is a world leader in a negative sense. You can be a positive leader, making change that affect well beyond your borders, or you could be a negative leader.
You could say the same about Hitler, couldn't you? Could you
and absolutely, he was a negative world leader. Okay, because he had impacts way beyond his borders.
Yeah.
All right, but they were negative, not positive. So I would say yes, he is a world leader, but in a very negative sense.
Yeah.
Dave, most of the world has almost every country has universally admonished Russia for what it's doing in the Ukraine. Is there any scope within the Security Council to remove them as a Security Council member? Let's assume, for example, that they lost the war and they were a defeated country. Would there be a process by which you could disarm them off their nuclear weapons and actually remove them as a Security Council member? Or is that just the framework there?
Still, just so there is one technicality of which all of us should be aware, that during the Soviet Union, there were 3 members of United Nations: Soviet Union, Belarus, and Ukraine. Now, with the demise of the Soviet Union, what should have happened is that Russia had to apply to become a member, replacing the Soviet Union. There is a process. That process has never been implemented. So today, never mind Security Council, the all membership of Russia in United Nations is highly questionable. And if Western leaders would take a better care of this problem, they would amplify it, and they would have to go through procedure. I don't think that they would deny Russia membership in United Nations, but at least they had to go to procedure and to see where it all goes.
Yeah, my personal opinion is, having been chairman of the audit committee for the United Nations in the past, that the Security Council needs fundamental reform. My personal view is that when you look at the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, that was based upon conditions that existed at the end of World War II. And things are very different today, and they're going to even be more different when you look forward to 2050. My view is that you ought to expand the permanent members on the Security Council to include countries like Germany, Japan, India, as an example, all right, who are major players today, and in some cases will be even bigger players like India in the future. I also think that no country, including the United States, should have veto power over a potential proposed action by the Security Council. The fact that that happens means that anytime that something happens that Russia doesn't like or China doesn't like or we don't like, that nothing happens. You can't do anything. All right. You also have to keep in mind the UN doesn't have forces, and it doesn't have troops on its own, and it basically has to get members to agree to provide troops, which, by the way, they get paid for. Okay. And it got a number of member nations that consistently provide troops to the UN because it makes them money. Whereas the U.S. does not do it. It doesn't think it's appropriate for it to do it. But even if we did, we'd lose money because our troops get paid so much. But so I think UN needs fundamental reform.
David, I would like to add something to what you just said.
Yes, sir.
That the recent meeting in the Saudi Arabia, where Russia was not invited, but all or many influential countries were there, including the United States and Brazil and China, and just name it. The reason for Russia not being invited, they wanted to have a free exchange of ideas, of opinions, to figure out what's really happening in Ukraine with Russia, what's the best solution to this crisis, how to get out of it. And obviously, Russia would be a very negative factor to carry this free exchange of ideas.
Dave, I just want to make a comment there. I'm not sure you could put Japan in the Security Council for two reasons. One, because they don't have any sort of active military that attacks. They've handed that up.
That's changing.
Well, hopefully it'll change.
By the way, the Security Council has nothing to do with military.
Right.
I mean,
So,
that's not why you do the Security Council.
hopefully that'll change. I'm not sure that China would like Japan being there. But back to the question, though, and also if you get Germany in there, you've got overrepresentation in Europe because of France and arguably the UK. There's no representation out of Africa. There's no representation in other parts of the world. But I would just wonder, though, if you were to amend it so that the permanent members can't veto each other, if one country has a problem with the proposed action, is that the whole purpose of the Security Council for the other members to say no, don't do that? We're gonna have an issue with that. Wasn't that the whole point of this?
Let me clarify. The Security Council represents the world, and each region of the world is given so many slots on the Security Council. The issue is are you a permanent member, meaning that you're always on it, or are you not? Okay, and so the UN is very careful to make sure that they have global representation for all 5 regions of the world. The issue is how many permanent members should they be, and who should they be, and should one be able to veto others? My personal view is, you should have a majority vote of the permanent members, majority vote of the council, which would mean that nobody could effectively veto a proposed action that is in the collective interest of the world, but not in the individual interest of one of the members of the Security Council. Permanent.
So, David, just really quickly, and I'm trying to understand, and it even comes back to what Shaquille was talking about, because Africa makes up 17.92% of the global population, and Asia makes up an even larger population. I think it's like close to 60%. So is either Israel or South Africa that is considered the Security Council representative of the nation or the continent of Africa and all along those lines? Because I was trying to figure out who would be the
here's how it works.
Yes.
Right now, I believe there are 15 members of the Security Council. 5 are permanent members. 10 are serve a term. Okay, and those 10 change. And the UN divides the world into 5 regions.
Right.
And so, therefore, you have the 5 permanent members. And then you have 2 members of each of the 5 regions that serve on the Security Council on a rotating basis. And you could also say, well, maybe the Security Council needs to be a little bit bigger if you're going to make, maybe you have 3 per region. Okay. I mean, there are different things you can do. My major point is this: the permanent members of the Security Council made sense at the end of World War II. They don't make sense now. And the idea that any country, including the United States, has the ability to veto any proposed action, I think is totally inappropriate.
As you mentioned earlier, Dave, the United Nations needs to be adjusted. When it was formed, I think 1947 or so,
Correct.
there were fewer than 50 countries. There were 48 countries or so on the planet. Today, there are close to 200 countries on the planet. Yeah, United Nations needs to be adjusted to take into consideration the fact that there's so many more nations today.
Totally agree.
One of the issues with United Nations reform is actually getting the leadership of the United Nations to actually agree to be reformed. And I think without outside pressure to do that, you end up with a political quagmire, much like a supranational government. And this can cause things to slow down. It can also, in my personal opinion, can cause the United Nations to veer well outside of its stated purpose and veer into matters that it really shouldn't be involved in.
We're going to go on to our next world leader, Modi, President Modi of India. David, what are your thoughts about him being a world leader?
I think Modi is up and coming, and I think India is a critical player looking forward. The real question is, which way is India going to go? They are the leaders of the non-aligned movement within the United Nations. They clearly have a major impact in the United Nations. They have the largest population in the world. Second largest. They're going to be the largest, in the future. They are trying to form their own sphere of influence. I don't think they're going to ally with China because they've had border conflicts in the past. They have historically had reasonably close relationships with Russia. So I see them as having an increasing influence in the world beyond their region. And part of that is because they're the head of the non-aligned movement in the United Nations. And when you think, I think there's roughly about 80 countries that are part of the non-aligned movement, and it's one country, one vote. Doesn't make any difference what your population is, what your GDP is. One country, one vote.
The non-aligned movement was started by Marshal Tito of Yugoslavia.
Yeah, definitely. I remember that.
He bears credit for that.
Yeah. Tito.
Yeah.
Hey, by the way, I had put this up here just in case folks were wondering, but the current UN security members are, as you said, China, France, the Russian Federation, the United Kingdom, and the United States. But currently, I think Gabon is term that is coming up, which is why they are not listed, but they are Albania, sorry, mispronounced it, Albania, Brazil, Ecuador, Ghana, which is the one representing Africa, among others that I'm getting ready to mention, Japan, Malta, Mozambique, another representative of Africa, Switzerland, and the United Arab Emirates. So definitely those are the current Security Council members. And I'm sure some people may be surprised by some of those, even though I know Ghana has got a lot of economic development recently, and I'm not sure what Mozambique is doing economically, but I know Ghana is a economic power in some ways and everything. I am somewhat surprised at Malta, because Malta is a relatively small country and all along those lines. And there are a couple of other ones like Ecuador that I'm surprised at.
I think, Dave, in relation to India, it'd be very dangerous to admit them as a permanent member until their situation domestically, as far as their politics is concerned, is resolved. We can't, we don't want to see what we've seen with China, which is where we've elevated China up and then we criticize China for not doing things the way that we want them to do. And I think that we're going to see the same thing with India. You've certainly seen a move to very far right Hinduism under Modi's leadership. We're seeing a lot of division within the Indian community. And I think that really veiling that behind democracy as they're heading towards a one-party state is a very dangerous thing for India. So I would suggest that we be very careful in our treatment of India and how we interact with them in the West.
I think we also have to look at certain things like right now, China and presumably India as well are still deemed to be developing nations. We can debate that with India. I clearly don't think it's an appropriate status for China now.
Okay. Well, speaking of China, what's your thoughts, David, on President Xi of China as a world leader?
There's no question he's a world leader for several reasons. One, because he's head of the country that has the largest population in the world, the largest GDP based upon purchasing power parity, the second largest GDP based on nominal dollars, the second most effective military after the United States, although it's not a global reach. It's got its Belt and Road Initiative, which is a long-term plan, which has economic, diplomatic, military, and cultural implications. He's an autocratic leader. There's no question about it, which is good news, bad news for him. Good news is when he says something, it gets done and it gets implemented quickly. The bad news is not good for freedom, not good for human rights, not good for other things. He clearly has significant ambitions for control of that region. Whether or not he wants to do anything beyond that, I would debate, other than from an economic standpoint. He's clearly a world leader.
David, what did you say was lacking the global reach? Because when I think of China, I think of a lot of global reaches, whether that's cultural or even some of the things that they are buying in the West. So I was trying to figure out exactly what you said.
They don't have a global military capability.
Okay.
Yes.
No, that's correct. And as you know, Shaquille, part of their Belt and Road Initiative is to give them more military presence around the world. And I agree. I think it's a timing difference. I think they will have a global military reach. They just don't yet.
And I'm going to repeat what I've said before. It is our fault that we're falling behind China. The country where my family come from is Fiji. Why is China in Fiji and the United States and Australia aren't? Fiji, by the way, from Sydney is a 4-hour flight. It's actually less time to go from Sydney to Fiji than it is to go from Sydney to Perth. So, I don't understand this, and I'm seeing that as well in Africa, where I'm seeing the Chinese investments everywhere. Now, I don't hold anything against the Chinese; they're acting rationally.
There are two important issues that we can learn from China. One is they drink their soup. We should start drinking our soup. It's much easier than using a spoon. And the other one is to rise in government. You need to pass civil service examinations, which are increasingly more difficult as you go further up the scale. Now, the founders of democracy, say the ancient Greeks, 500 BC or so, would not be happy to see the way we run democracies today. They would be much happier with the way the Chinese run it, where you have to qualify in order to go up the ladder in management. In the United States, somebody who is basically a thief like Trump can get elected. Somebody with an IQ of 90 can get elected. Whereas in ancient Greece, you had to meet certain standards like the Chinese do today. The Chinese have to pass increasingly more challenging examinations in order to rise in management.
Would you suggest
also have to be a member of the Communist Party?
Yeah, that's true.
Would you suggest along those lines, Milan, that you should then end universal suffrage so that only qualified voters have the ability to elect politicians and government?
Ask that again.
So if your suggestion is that people should be qualified in civil service before they're able to become government leaders,
yes,
would you then along those same lines suggest that we should end universal suffrage and that only people that are qualified should be able to vote and have any kind of voice in how the government runs?
But I have one question.
That would be the same argument.
We better get to that.
We got to get to the last. We'll hold on that thought. Get to the last person, and this is Joe Biden. And with that, we're going to ask if he's a world leader to somebody who's spent time with Joe Biden the last couple months. Keeps flying to Washington D.C. to meet and greet him. Steve Rao, what are your thoughts of Joe Biden as a world leader?
Well, I mean, first of all, I know this is a politically touching concept, but I do want to thank Joe Biden, President Biden, for his service to the country. He served as United States Senator, Vice President of the United States, and he's had a life of tragedy, losing a wife and 2 children. I think that his age has made him really be a challenge to be an effective world leader and president. He has achieved a lot as president, but I think the fact that he's so old, I think, is kind of turning against him right now. I think that he was an effective leader as vice president. He had a lot of connections with world leaders. He was in more of a partnership with President Obama rather than the vice president that we have in now. And he was given specific things. I do like, as someone who lost a father-in-law to cancer, I do like his cancer moonshot after his son Beau Biden died, and kind of like the leadership he's taken. Many of us were surprised. I call Biden the accidental president. You know, I think that there were only two reasons why he won: Trump and COVID. And he got to be in the Oval Office, which is a dream that Beau Biden already had. This is going to be very surprising for those of you listening, but I really do hope that Joe Biden, actually, I think it'd be the best for him and his family if he did not run again and would just sort of sail off into the sunset and enjoy the well north of half a year's of century of service. I think if he does that, history will look upon him favorably, along with many world leaders. Now, I know there's not a lot of Joe Biden fans, but I do want to thank him for his service to the country. And I think there's a time, you know, when you got to move on, and I just get concerned about someone of that age holding such an office with so much pressure. So I'm going to leave it at that. I guess I did the Potomac two-step. Didn't really, you know, because I know there's some people that are unhappy with his performance.
Yeah.
But I think he's a good man, and I like him and his family. And you know, I pray for his
We're not
That
done.
was such a beautiful answer, Steve. I think Washington awaits you in your future.
Yeah.
Let me jump in. First, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. He's a world leader. He's a world leader because he's commander-in-chief and chief executive officer of the most powerful country on earth, which is by no means perfect and never will be. That's why we say we strive to form a more perfect union. I don't think he's a real effective world leader, but he is a world leader. And I agree with Steve. He should not run for re-election. And I also believe that Trump should not run for election. And what's more important than what I believe, a new poll that was just done by No Labels, 72% of Americans do not want Biden to run. 62% of Americans do not want Trump to run. We need new options. And if the parties don't listen to the American people, and if they run Biden, and if they run Trump, there will be a third option.
And unfortunately, because of the way the political system works in the West, and especially the United States, given that the majority of people don't want Biden or Trump to run, that makes it even more likely that those are going to be the two candidates. And I've never understood how this happens, but that's what ends up happening. I do want to ask you, though, Dave, who do you think would be the logical people to replace if Biden doesn't run and Trump doesn't run? Certainly on the Democrat side, a lot of people talk about Gavin Newsom. On the Republican side, look, I think Ron DeSantis' run is over already. I can't see him ever clawing back from where he is.
Chris Christie.
Well, Chris Christie's not liked enough by the Republican base. So who do you think the replacements will be?
Well, first, I have a preference for people who have been governors. They may have done other things other than being governors. May have been in Congress. They may now be in the Senate, whatever. But I think governor is probably the best stepping stone to president. And so I think if Biden doesn't run, you're going to see the governors of Michigan, California, Illinois, New Jersey, and potentially other states run. Okay. And in the case of the Republicans, I think they already have a lot of people running, but you may have other people jump in, including my governor, the governor of Virginia. Right now, I think he's waiting until 2028 if the Republicans don't win, or 2032 if they do win, because he's relatively young.
Got to run. Thank you so much, David. Thank you so much.
Yep. And we're at the hour, so we do want to thank the Honorable David Walker.
Thanks, everybody.
International panel on world.
David
leaders.
Walker for president. David Walker for president. Vice president.
There we go.
Good thing my wife in here. She'd have a heart attack.
No. All right. Bye-bye.
I'm just gonna run your campaign event. That's all, David.